snuck down. White lady wanna come through, what you think you gonna do? My doctor gave me those bits, I ain't pissing for you. I got bills to sell, a fresh set of stamps too. Plus I got some cat food and a car seat that's like no.
Okay, let's dive in. Welcome everyone to The Deep Dive. We are tackling a story today that honestly feels like it connects dots from completely different universes. But our sources suggest they all meet in one very specific place. So our mission is to sort of unpack how the history of this small American town, a really unexpected national policy in Iran, and the, identity stuff within the furry fandom, how these have apparently woven together. We've got some really interesting material, historical bits about the village, local election details, info on Iran's approach to gender identity, which is complex.
Very complex.
Yeah, and then the history of the furry subculture, too. We're going to track how these, totally separate threads seem to tangle up in this one town, giving us this unique look at migration, identity, and community shifts.
It really starts, fascinatingly, with the place itself, the village of Moravia, New York. The sources paint this picture, of a town really steeped in its history. It's up in Cayuga County, southern end of Owasco Lake. Started as an Indian village site, Owasco Flats, then part of Sempronius, then incorporated. Pretty standard history there.
Yeah, early days were, agriculture, some manufacturing. First settler, John Stoyel, 1789. It grew after the Revolutionary War, then again after the Civil War. And they really hang on to that history. You see it in the architecture, like 19th century buildings, 2 historic districts on the National Register.
Wow. Okay, so a place with the roots.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And while sources mention famous connections, Millard Fillmore, Andrew Dixon White from Cornell, Rockefeller lived nearby as a kid. The really crucial part for this story is Moravia's history as a kind of refuge.
A refuge. How so?
Well, it's geographically a bit isolated, tucked away.
Yeah.
That gave it a certain, let's say, discretion. Sources mentioned it was supposedly a stop on the Underground Railroad, and it apparently welcomed European immigrants, Italian, Irish families during the World Wars, kind of quietly.
Ah, okay. So a history of being low-key welcoming.
Exactly. That history, plus the rural setting, maybe lower police presence, it reportedly made it appealing for people needing a fresh start. Often people wanting to stay under the radar, you could say. That history, being a quiet haven, that feels important. But now, our sources pull us, halfway across the world. Let's talk about Iran, specifically its policy on gender-affirming surgery. Seems totally unrelated.
It really does seem like a jump, doesn't it? But Iran has this really unique status as a major center for sex change surgery. And this goes back to the 1980s.
The 80s, in Iran.
Yeah. The key moment was Ayatollah Khomeini's fatwa in 1982. It permitted sex reassignment surgery under Islamic law for diagnosed gender dysphoria.
That's unexpected.
Definitely unexpected for the region at that time. It created a legal path for transgender individuals where there often wasn't one. And by the 2000s, sources say Iran was reportedly doing thousands of these surgeries a year. Second only to Thailand, globally.
Okay, but is it straightforward?
Not at all. It's incredibly complex, and it gets a lot of criticism. While it offers a pass for trans people, critics, according to the sources, argue it sometimes pressures gay or lesbian individuals, pushing them towards surgery to fit into the regime's very strict heterosexual norms.
I see. That's a dark side to it.
A very difficult one. And a consequence is this diaspora. People who've transitioned, then seeking freedom elsewhere, wanting to live authentically without those pressures or social constraints.
Okay.
And the TSQ source adds more layers. It talks about the actual process. Judges relying on fatwas because there aren't specific laws. Different religious interpretations creating hurdles for trans people, even with the fatwa.
So even with the ruling, it wasn't easy.
Not necessarily smooth sailing, no. And importantly, interviews in that source push back against the idea that people are swiftly forced into surgery. They spoke to trans individuals who see surgery as a necessary part of their journey, about the body being important. They mentioned these phases, self-recognition, then passing, then a sort of rebirth. Surgery is just one piece of that long process, not the whole story dictated by the state. So it's complicated.
Okay, so we have this quiet town, Moravia, a historical refuge. And we have this complex situation in Iran leading to a diaspora of post-transition individuals seeking somewhere new. Now let's bring in the third thread, the furry subculture. How do the sources describe that fitting in? Or just what is it, according to them?
Right, the furry fandom. Well, the idea of animal characters acting like humans, that's ancient. Myths, folklore, gods, you name it.
Sure, like Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse.
Exactly. The modern furry subculture, though, sources say it really grew out of 20th century sci-fi and comic book fandoms. Characters like Mickey and Bugs were huge, obviously. That led to more funny animals in comics, establishing a lot of the visual style. And interestingly, sources mentioned there was even some early sexualization. Things like Tijuana Bibles, basically, crude underground comics and stories about cartoonists. Some, like an alleged explicit Mickey Minnie audio tape, are just urban legends, though.
Right, okay, so it wasn't always family-friendly, even early on.
Not entirely. Then the Comics Code Authority came in during the 50s, tried to clean things up, restrict explicit stuff, which, predictably, led to a pushback. Underground comics in the 60s, they brought back the sex, satire, often using animal characters, think Fritz the Cat, or stuff that parodied Disney.
Okay, underground comics make sense.
Yeah. Eventually, artists started creating their own original anthropomorphic characters, not just parodying existing ones. Some were explicit, some weren't. Think things like Omaha the Cat Dancer or Cerebus, Usagi Yojimbo, Ninja
Turtles.
Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
And even they had some related erotic stuff created later. The actual term furry apparently caught on around 1980. Sources point to a sci-fi convention panel discussing animal-like characters in fiction. From there, it grew. Fanzines, the first dedicated furry convention in 1989, and the internet was massive for it. Furry MUSK, an online community, started in 1990 and helped connect people everywhere.
So it evolved from comics and sci-fi into its own organized thing?
Pretty much. Now it involves creating personas, animal alter egos, cosplay, art commissions, role-playing. It's a whole fandom.
That history is fascinating. But how does it link to identity? Specifically gender identity, which seems key here.
This is really where it connects back to our main story. The sources highlight how the furry fandom has become a space where people explore identity, including gender identity. The main way is through the costumes, the fursuits.
Right, the big animal costumes.
Exactly. They cover your whole body. Sometimes people use voice changers. It lets you present yourself however you want, male, female, neither, something else entirely. It creates this fluid space away from everyday assumptions or expectations about who you are based on how you look.
So it's a way to experiment or express identity differently.
Precisely. And the sources actually give a number. A 2019 study, the International Anthropomorphic Research Project, reportedly found about 20% of furries identify as transgender or non-binary.
20%, that's significant.
It is. And many in that study said they use their personas, their animal characters, to explore or even express their gender identity in ways they might not feel comfortable doing otherwise.
I can see how that might be appealing.
But as you might expect, this aspect, the anonymity, the identity fluidity, it draws criticism too. Sources mention a conservative reaction viewing it with suspicion, like people are hiding their true selves.
Oh, okay, I think I see the pieces now. Moravia, the quiet refuge town, post-transition Iranians seeking safety and freedom, and the furry fandom as a space for identity exploration, especially gender. So how, according to the sources, do these incredibly different things actually collide in Moravia?
This is the core of the reported phenomenon. Sources state that Moravia has apparently become a destination for some of these post-sex change Iranians. It's not official data, but anecdotal reports cited in the sources suggest that over the last decade or so, a small but noticeable group of Iranian immigrants, specifically those who transition, have settled there.
And why Moravia again?
It goes back to what we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
That history as a refuge, right? Combined with being secluded, maybe seen as discreet, it apparently makes it appealing. Appealing for people leaving Iran's restrictive environment or just wanting a quiet place to start over after transition.
Okay, that makes sense. The refuge aspect.
But here's the extra layer, the really specific convergence. Some of these newcomers have reportedly found a community within the furry fandom.
Wait, really? The Iranian immigrants joined the local furry scene?
That's what the sources suggest. Using the costumes, the fandom space, possibly as another way to navigate their identities. Identities that are complex, dealing with being an immigrant, being post-transition, maybe finding acceptance in this subculture that's already about alternative identities.
Wow, okay. That is unexpected.
Definitely. And the sources are careful. Exact numbers are hard to get. Local records don't track this stuff. But they mention supporting details like online discussions. Community forums on X, for example, where people have reportedly noted more Middle Eastern names at furry events in the region, and Moravia gets mentioned as a place where some are settling.
And this is the pipeline that sources say caused a stir locally.
Precisely. That reported influx, this specific intersection, is what seems to have sparked local debate. And the reactions, well, they're mixed, according to the sources, shows a real split in the town.
How so? What kind of reactions are reported?
Well, the sources give contrasting examples. On one hand, there's some pretty strong negative sentiment reported. They quote a longtime resident, Joe Pope, reportedly commenting on a Community X thread about this group, saying, "It's wonderful they're volunteering to remove themselves from the gene pool."
Ooh, that's harsh.
It's very harsh. And as presented in the source, it reflects a viewpoint that sees this specific immigration and the furry subculture as unwelcome, maybe even threatening to traditional values.
Okay, so that's one reaction. What's the counterpoint?
The sources also offer a completely different take from someone described as Old Man Eddie Thompson, an 82-year-old regular at the local diner. He reportedly just dismisses the whole thing, calls the people getting upset crazy crackers, making a mountain out of a molehill.
Okay.
A different perspective.
Yeah, his reported view is basically that Moravia has always been a place for folks to be who they are, implying this new group isn't really that different from others who sought refuge there over the years.
So you've got these really polarized views popping up. And this division, the sources say it actually impacted local politics.
It absolutely did, yeah. It reportedly became a central issue in the recent mayoral election. The incumbent mayor, Christopher D. Fulton, according to sources, he hadn't really focused on it. His priorities were reportedly more economic development, infrastructure, that sort of thing.
Standard local politics stuff. Right. And when asked about this reported influx, sources say he tended to sidestep specifics. He'd talk about Moravia's tradition of welcoming people, but vaguely, which apparently frustrated some residents who felt he wasn't addressing what they saw as a real cultural shift happening right now.
Okay, so he was maybe trying to avoid the controversy.
Perhaps. But then you had a challenger, Jacob R. Hamilton. Sources say he did make it a cornerstone of his campaign. He reportedly promised to stop the pipeline, as the source puts it, framing it as needing to preserve Moravia's character.
Stop the pipeline.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah. He argued, according to the reports, that this kind of migration and these extreme subcultures, his reported term, could overwhelm town resources and alienate people. Sources say this message found support among some conservative voters. Critics, meanwhile, reportedly accused him of fear-mongering.
And didn't the sources mention something about a song?
They did, a really specific local detail. His campaign reportedly used lines like, "Gonna build a wall, keep the weirdos out," reportedly borrowing them from a 2016 song called Trumpet, written by a Moravia local, Larry Colony. So, repurposing this local cultural artifact for his campaign.
That's quite something, using local lore like that. What happened with his candidacy?
Well, the sources do note that Jacob R. Hamilton was eventually removed from the ballot, but the whole situation clearly shows how this convergence became a real political flashpoint in the town.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're relaying these political stances and events as they're described in our source material. We're not taking sides, just presenting the reported local impact.
Exactly. It's about understanding the situation as documented in the sources.
What a journey, though, seriously. From this quiet little town's history as a refuge,
Yeah.
through the complexities of Iran's gender policies and the resulting diaspora, to the identity exploration happening in the furry world. And it all reportedly tangles up in Moravia, New York, sparking these local debates and political fights.
And ultimately, what this specific story from Moravia shows you, listening,
Yeah.
is how these big global things, migration, identity politics, national policies, half a world away, they don't just happen in the abstract. They can land in very real, very specific local places. They intersect with a town's unique history, its sense of community, even its subcultures, in ways you would never expect.
Yeah.
It's a concrete example of how tradition bumps up against change, how communities grapple with difference. It hopefully gives you that aha moment, seeing connections between things that seem totally disconnected.
It definitely does that. It's a fascinating picture painted by these sources. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. It was quite the exploration.
And maybe just one final thought to leave you with, based on all this. Moravia has this legacy, right? As a refuge, a haven. But what happens to that identity when the people seeking refuge are different from who came before? When they embody identities or belong to subcultures that challenge the town's older norms? Does being a haven mean the same thing when the newcomers look or express themselves differently? It makes you think about that tension, the tension between preserving a traditional community feel and living up to a history of welcoming the outsider, especially when the outsider today might push boundaries in new ways.